What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking our top 5 do not draft wide receivers for the 2022 fantasy football season. Basically, these are all big name guys ranked inside the top 25 at their position that, for one reason or another, we are fading and avoiding this year. So make sure to tune in and learn why. Now, before we get into it, a quick reminder, if you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree? Who else would you put on this list? Along with any other questions you guys might have, we will do our best to answer them all. And lastly, make sure to check out the 2022 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide, now available for purchase. Everything you could want at a great value. Top 150 overall player rankings in standard and PPR formats, individual player bios, tiers, projections, along with general fantasy advice. Details in the description. But with that being said, let's get into it. And we, as you can see, have our Fantasy Pros rankings all ready to go here. And they are ordered per PPR format, so keep that in mind as we go down the list. And again, this is based on expert consensus, so, this is pretty accurate in terms of what you might see come your draft day, how these wide receivers are ordered. But let's immediately get into our number one guy, and that is Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. He comes in at the number 10 spot here. So he's literally a top 10 wide receiver per these rankings, but we aren't that bullish on him. Now, you might say, well, how can you have Deebo Samuel as a fade? Last year, he was a top 3 wide receiver across all formats. And yes, we recognize that he had a huge breakout season, but here are the reasons why we think he is going to regress this year and, why we'd rather avoid him. And it honestly starts at the quarterback position, and it's the most relevant reason in our opinion, because for all those people that are clamoring about Trey Lance and saying he's going to break out this year and he is our target, in later rounds to be this league-winning quarterback, sure, there's the potential for that, but I feel like not enough people also realize what that means for the fantasy weapons in San Francisco. And what that means is that this offense won't have the same passing upside as it did with Jimmy Garoppolo, regardless of how people feel about him as a quarterback, because Trey Lance is a run-first quarterback. He still needs to develop as a passer. Hell, that's why he didn't start his rookie season. There's a reason for that. And in my opinion, that's also why Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the roster, but, people will say because of the injury, he needs to rehab. TBD, but I do think when it's all said and done, Lance probably starts the majority of the year in 2022, and that means less, targets, not only for Deebo Samuel, for all these pass catchers. That means less passing upside, less touchdown upside. And then on top of that, Deebo Samuel himself, this offseason, said he doesn't want to be utilized as a rusher as much as he was last year. Due to contract disputes, due to the way he wants to, be paid. And a big reason why he had so much success last year was because of his, pretty much dual usage out of the backfield, his rushing touchdowns, those big chunk plays with him out of the backfield. I think with those also potentially going down, you're going to see him continue to tumble down rankings. And lastly, the fact that he's going in the second round right now typically is just a little bit too rich for my blood. So for that reason, Deebo Samuel is somebody that I am probably going to be leaving my drafts more often without than with this year. But let's continue to the number 11 spot here, just one spot below Deebo. That is A.J. Brown of now the Philadelphia Eagles. And he's probably my biggest fade on this list, my biggest, avoid wide receiver, if you will. The reason for this is I just don't like, again, the quarterback situation in Philadelphia. Now, sure, Jalen Hurts is a good fantasy quarterback, but that's because of what he can do with his legs. Let's not, pretend that the reason you're drafting Jalen Hurts as potentially a top 10, top 5, however bullish you are on him, this season is because of the skills he has as a passer and not because of the fact that he has 1,000-yard rushing upside, which is a cheat code for quarterbacks. But what that means for his wide receivers is that, they're kind of going to be secondary on this offense. We saw it last year. I mean, we saw it with Devonta Smith. Sure, he had some big games, but then he also had huge stretches where he just disappeared and he would cost you weeks. And I think now with A.J. Brown being in Philadelphia, sure, it helps the offense, and it's potentially going to make Jalen Hurts a guy that looks, to the passing game more, and it's a little bit more reliable, but that doesn't change Jalen Hurts' skills as a passer. To me, A.J. Brown isn't going to be a high volume type of wide receiver. That's never really been his MO, even when he was in Tennessee. Like, he's not going to get 100 catches on the season. So for me, that's another reason why I have him lower on my rankings. Now, as opposed to Tennessee, he is still he's going to have to contend with more pass catchers. Like, when he was in Tennessee, it was primarily him, but now he's got Devonta Smith. He's got somebody like a Dallas Goedert, and Jalen Hurts is going to look at those options as well. So the targets are going to be going elsewhere, not just funneled through A.J. Brown. And then lastly, again, I think this offense is going to be focusing on the run. They're not just going to abandon it. Jalen Hurts is a run-first quarterback. They've got Miles Sanders. They've got rushing options in that backfield. So for that reason, I think A.J. Brown is a big-time fade. I have him outside of my top 20 wide receivers this year. Now, moving on, we get to the number 13 spot here, Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Probably going to be an unpopular pick, but hear me out. I was all in on Deontay Johnson last season, but the reason for that is because Big Ben was still with the Steelers. And people are going to say, well, Big Ben was a shell of himself last year. It's better off that he retired. Now the Steelers have a quote-unquote quarterback upgrade. How can you not be in on Deontay Johnson? Well, the thing that I realized last year was that because Big Ben was close to retirement, because his deep ball was lacking, that this offense, the Steelers last year, would be predicated probably on a lot of short, quick dink and dump passes, and that's how Deontay Johnson was utilized. That wasn't going to be the Chase Claypool role. And then on top of that, Juju Smith-Schuster got hurt for the majority of the year, which made Deontay Johnson an even bigger option on this offense. And I feel not enough people were talking about that Juju injury last year. Now, Juju, sure, no longer in Kansas City, or no longer in Pittsburgh. He's now in Kansas City. But the Steelers have revamped this offense. They've added wide receiver talent via the draft. So it's basically back to a similar type of offense as it was last year. And the thing that I'm most worried about is the whole quarterback situation. Again, you're going to notice that's a theme here with these wide receivers. Even though we think they're very talented, the quarterbacks are a lot of times what we have issues with. So here with Mitch Trubisky potentially, or with Kenny Pickett, if I had to bet, I think it would be probably Trubisky for the majority of the season. I think he's going to do a better job of spreading out the football. I think that he's not going to be as reliant on those dink and dump passes. And honestly, this holds for both quarterbacks. And the reason why Deontay Johnson was so valuable last year is because he just got absolute insane volume. And I think people that are saying that he's going to see that same volume this year are, a little bit unrealistic. So due to those reasons, Deontay Johnson is somebody that I'm fading. I don't think he's going to see the same value because of the quarterback situation. I don't think he's going to see the same volume because of the number of wide receivers there offensively. And with that being said, I definitely don't have him in my top 15 wide receivers like consensus here. Now, let's move on here with one DK Metcalf, who is barely inside the top 20. He comes in at the number 19 spot. Obviously, Metcalf, a huge name, a guy that just last year was being drafted early in the second round, but that was when Seattle still had Russell Wilson. Now, without Russell Wilson, this is a completely different situation. And again, it goes back to the quarterback. now Seattle is going to be relying on Drew Lock is their season-long quarterback. And, even if it's not him, like to me, there's not a viable quarterback on this offense. We saw last season what Seattle was like without Russell Wilson. I mean, both Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, if you want to be honest, weren't viable options. You basically had to say, okay, well, these guys are definitely not wide receiver ones anymore. They are low-end wide receiver twos at best, and typically they're more, bust than boom. And I don't know why this season would be any different. So even though DK Metcalf is a big name, even though, he's very talented, I think that the quarterback situation will not precipitate success. And I would say just because, you're tempted by the talent of Metcalf, I don't think it's necessarily going to win out. We saw last season specifically where there were multiple weeks where it didn't. Tyler Lockett is still here, so both these guys are going to be options offensively. I just preferably would stay away from Metcalf. I think that it's going to be too up and down, and I don't trust him as a viable, wide receiver one or really high-end wide receiver two, which kind of is what these rankings currently have him at. And then finally, we get to our number 5 guy here, and that is Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys. And Cooper is actually somebody that, a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, I was also kind of pretty high on. But then these Deshaun Watson news continue to kind of come out. And honestly, it's looking worse and worse for Watson, which means it's looking worse and worse for the pass catchers in Cleveland. Because, I don't think that Baker Mayfield will end up being the quarterback all season long or for however long Watson is suspended for. But I think that bridge is probably burned. So, I mean, the quarterback options afterwards aren't exactly ideal. I think the offense then without Watson is going to just be very run heavy. And since there's no quarterback that you can really trust here, to me, Amari Cooper, even though, again, he's very talented, we know what he has done with the Cowboys offensively with Dak Prescott. There's nobody of that Dak Prescott caliber here offensively for the Browns. I would have Amari Cooper outside of my top 20 wide receivers, and in that case, I would just be avoiding all the pass catchers for Cleveland, honestly. Now, if I had to guess how long Watson is suspended for, I've heard anything from half the season all the way to the full season, all the way to he might never play in the NFL again. So that just makes him too big of a risk. I don't know when the news is going to come out on the suspension. So I guess you could risk it and just wait last minute until some type of news comes out, or just try to pull the trigger now and try to be optimistic. But to me, I just don't think that's the smart way to do it. I really do think there is going to be, by the looks of it, some type of suspension for Deshaun Watson, and it's probably going to be lengthier than shorter. So for that reason, I am out on Amari Cooper and in general, the Cleveland pass catchers. But with that, we wrap up this breakdown of our top 5 do not draft wide receivers for this 2022 fantasy football season. As always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? What other names would you have in this category, along with any other question you guys might have? We'll do our best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. And then lastly, make sure to check out the 2022 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide, now available for purchase. Details in the description. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.